Thank you so much for watching Landon C. Goes There. Please subscribe and hit the like button and the bell notification button. If you're not familiar with the Andy Griffith Show, then you're probably from another planet. The series carved a niche into society that just won't leave. People like myself are completely obsessed with it. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the greatest sitcom of all time. Andy Griffith created a mighty special place in his small-town TV comedy. And it's truly amazing that this show has aired every day someplace since it left the CBS network in 1968. When it stopped production, it was ranked as the #1 primetime series. All of this after spending 8 years of network television in the top 10 of the Nielsen ratings. Mayberry was such a comfortable town, and it was so calm living there that Sheriff Andy Taylor hardly had any sheriffing to do at all. Most of his time was spent dispensing wisdom to his motherless son Opie and reining in his jittery deputy, Barney Fife. Andy helped Mayberry townsfolk keep on the straight and narrow and stay neighborly with each other. The series was bred during a time of upheaval in the U.S. The generation gap was widening, and hippies turned on and dropped out during this time. War protests raged everywhere, but the Andy Griffith Show drew staggering numbers of people to its viewings. As you look at it, it's not strange at all to imagine that this show was so popular during that time. Who wouldn't rather live in a serene town like Mayberry than in real town USA, which might be beset with crime, corruption, war, taxes, and societal chaos? No wonder the Andy Griffith Show endures and bypasses so many other sitcoms that were landmarks of TV during the late 60s and early 70s. As a matter of fact, during the show's run from 1960 to 1968, shows like the Beverly Hillbillies was twice the nation's top-ranked show. There were other series that were high on the Nielsen ratings, shows like Gunsmoke and Wagon Train. And then there was Bonanza too. All of these shows showed how much Americans wanted to be anywhere rather than in the here and now. You can see all these other shows on reruns in numerous places on cable TV. But the Andy Griffith Show turned out to be in a class completely by itself. It made all of us wonder if anybody really lived in an idyllic town like Mayberry. In our minds, we thought they did. A place where everybody knew everybody and they all got along and meant well. The public just really seemed to crave the more primitive version of Americana. The evidence of this is really strong in the fact that everybody's favorite episodes of The Andy Griffith Show are the black and white ones. The series was filmed in that format during the first 5 seasons, the ones that had Don Knotts playing Barney Fife. Then when Knotts left the cast for the big screen, the show transitioned to color, and I feel it lost much of its charm. It was still a great show, don't get me wrong, but there was something missing. The black and white nature of it put it in a fantasy land. It made it a place that we only went to in our minds. Another reason that the show endures to this day, that it was TV's first dramedy. A laugh track was used on the show because everything was filmed in single camera format rather than in a studio like most of the Desilu produced series were done. Andy Griffith himself insisted on this because he wanted to be able to include exterior shots because he remembered what the outdoors meant to him growing up in North Carolina as a kid. We're immediately immersed into this with the whistling theme opening credits, where Andy and his son Opie are heading down to do some fishing at the fishing hole. Andy himself first found fame with a bit that he did that was called What It Was Football. It portrayed a country bumpkin who stumbles upon a college football game and tries to figure out what he's seeing. That routine, released as a single in 1953, became an overwhelming novelty hit. Griffith was then in No Time for Sergeants, where he would meet a short, gangly, bug-eyed, budding comic named Don Knotts. And in 1960, he guest starred on an episode of Make Room for Daddy, playing a country sheriff who catches city slicker Danny Thomas speeding in his fancy car. That role would evolve into the iconic Sheriff Andy Taylor. That storyline about a sheriff who is taught to appreciate the joys of country life, and this feeling would become an overarching narrative for the next 8 years of the series. The Andy Griffith Show started a trend. People in the rural areas of America were getting TV for the very first time, and the series was made to tap into that audience. The copycat shows followed, like the Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, and Petticoat Junction. And these were the first sitcoms in the country where characters spoke in Southern accents. But the Andy Griffith Show was totally different. It was just simply better than those shows that tried to imitate it. Unlike the shows that tried to follow in its footsteps, and virtually every other sitcom of that time would have episodes that were wacky or zany, but the Andy Griffith Show never did. All the storylines were more plausible, and the characters were much more authentic. The cinematography was a notch above, and the direction was superb too, much better than the other shows done at that time. The show was interested in only keeping the mellow pace of small-town life viable week to week. The fictional town of Mayberry and what it represented was never held up to ridicule at all. Other shows were more laughed at than they were laughed with. Mayberry was treated reverently, and it was a town that was ideal in our heads. It was a synonym for the quiet pleasures and virtues of small-town American life. Being a widower, Andy's domestic life was devoted to raising Opie and eating Aunt Bee's cooking, or maybe even going on an occasional date with his schoolteacher girlfriend, Helen Crump. In Mayberry, Andy is considered the law and order of the town. You might look at him as the model of effective policing, often settling down the firestorms that Barney created. Often he would dispense common sense wisdom to the quirky characters that he ended up crossing paths with in the always lovable town of Mayberry. Go watch a couple of episodes of the Andy Griffith Show tonight. It'll put you in a better mood, and you'll finish the day with a smile on your face. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.